Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We're excited to chat with you all today. We're going to let folks come in as you guys are joining. We'll go ahead and start a couple minutes after the top of the hour. All right, if you all are just joining and didn't hear my first preamble, we're going to start a couple minutes after the top of the hour. So if folks are still trickling in, we'll give everyone one more minute to get settled and then we'll kick things off. All right, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. We do still have some folks joining us. Don't want to keep you waiting any longer. Today, we're going to talk about, vulnerability risk management, why it's the linchpin for proactive security. Your speakers today will be Erik Nost, joining us from Forrester as their senior analyst. Played a big role in the recently released Forrester Wave for vulnerability risk management. And I'll be moderating today from Brinko, VP of Solutions here, and I'll kind of talk to you a little bit about how we relate to the space and why we think proactive security is kind of the big next responsibility for security teams based on how teams in the industry has matured as a whole. Erik, do you just want to say hi real quick, and then we'll kind of move on to the agenda for everybody?
Sure. Hi. Real excited to be here. Thanks for having me here, Alex. My name is Erik Nost. I'm a senior analyst at Forrester Research, and I cover, vulnerability risk management, but also kind of these solutions that help support proactive security, which we'll talk about today in the webinar, things like attack surface management and so on. So happy to be here. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Erik. So we'll keep things moving. So you all know what to expect today. There's going to be a very brief intro on my end, on the Brinka side. Like I said, why is proactive security more important than ever? What's going on? What's changed? Our quick perspective. And then, proactive security is a big topic. Vulnerability management is a key piece to that topic, from our perspective. So I kind of like let you all know how we're kind of viewing the world from our perspective, and then we'll hand things off for the majority of the webinar to Erik on the Forrester side to break down into there hasn't been a Forrester Wave on vulnerability risk management since 2019. Why now? What's changed? And he's going to talk more in depth about proactive versus reactive security, what it takes to be proactive, and then also break down the recent Forrester Wave. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'll kick things off with a story. So I was on a call a couple weeks ago. The vulnerability management director. I love the way he said this. We're going through our sales pitch on that call, asking about, hey, are you facing any of these problems? And he's agreeing, but it's the what he said that I thought was interesting. He said, and I quote, "Back in the day, finding the problems was the problem. Today, doing stuff about everything we know about, and it's so much, is the problem." So, the way we think about it here on the Brinka side is, over the last 5 to 10 years, there was where are all these problems? We're on the other side of that now. And it's time to kind of stop just chasing the rush to react to all the cool things we're finding, all the threats we want to stop, all the potential paths for attackers to take, and start focusing more proactively on prioritizing those, taking in not just the threat context, but the potential for business impact from those exposures. again, just like a more proactive approach overall. And on the Brinca side of the world, we actually call this a risk operations center, a new approach to vulnerability management, but we really see it as the heart of your proactive security program. So I'm an analogy guy, so I just want to kind of clarify something. Like, being proactive doesn't mean that you're not still being reactive. There is a validity to both those motions. The analogy that I favor is, hey, just because I took my defensive driving course and wear my seatbelt does not mean that I don't want airbags in my car in case I get into a wreck. I still want the airbags. Said a different way, though, I don't want to rely on my airbags and not take defensive driving, not wear my seatbelt, and then my method of safely surviving a collision is just entirely dependent on how good my airbags are. So there's a concept a lot of folks are familiar with in security operations center. Historically, this has been, SOC team, SOC analysts, using maybe a SIM tool to pull in a bunch of different, data points, usually in the form of events and logs. But typically, historically, this has been more focused on the threat side. We have an active threat we need to respond to. We need to respond to it quickly. Whereas on the risk operations center side of the world, it's taking a page out of that playbook, but adapting it for being more proactive, i.e., hey, build one database or inventory of all your vulnerabilities across your attack surface, but not in the form of events and logs, in the form of kind of rich security findings, descriptions of what's going on, how to remediate them, rich detail, so that you can have all that stuff in one place to essentially proactively apply risk-based prioritization, mitigate those risks that are going to impact your business the most. And the last thing I'll say here is, so let's lean into that risk-based prioritization and mitigation. So on the Brinca side, we see this as a key player in this space is your vulnerability risk management technology to help you identify this sort of stuff. So that's what we'll talk about today. Like I said, both on the proactive side, on the vulnerability risk management side, and so on. But before that, so we're about to hand it off to Erik. Want to do a quick poll on how you guys feel about being proactive. And so you should see a poll pop up. I'll read it out to you all. We'll probably leave it up for about 90 seconds. So definitely read ahead if you want. But what are the barriers to proactive security? So think about your own organization or yourself, whichever you pick. What is your biggest challenge around being proactive? And we hear a lot, but would love to hear from you. Is it visibility? Is it getting buy-in from your stakeholders? Is it making sense of just the millions or tens of millions of vulnerabilities out there in your attack surface? Is it ownership complexity? Is it just everything? Or you're just not there yet. You just for right or wrong, you have your reasons. You just don't care about proactive security right now. There are no wrong answers. Don't be nervous. You won't be graded on this, but your response will help other folks understand kind of where they sit relative to you. So definitely please participate. Erik, do you have a hunch or a guess on which one of these might be biggest or smallest? While let's give it another 30 seconds for them to get their answers in.
I'm expecting a pretty even spread here. These are the most common challenges I speak with clients about, regardless of maturity levels or what they've implemented in their programs. There's always some aspect of visibility, and whether that's visibility on assets you might not know about but wish you knew about, or kind of think are there but you just can't prove that they're there, or just visibility into the ownership and who owns the remediation or who actually uses this asset or its purpose or value. So I expect an even spread.
Interesting. Okay. All right, cool. I think we're at time. Let's see if Erik is right. I'm gonna wait until the answer pops up and then I'll tell you my prediction. All right. So I believe you all can see the results, but I'll kind of read them out and then I'll stop sharing. And why don't we discuss a little bit before you hop into your slides, Erik? But interestingly, getting buy-in from stakeholders is not a barrier. And then I love this. I was hoping this would be the case, that everyone here joining a webinar about proactive security, no one's showing up and then saying they don't care about it. So we're attracting the right audience to these. Looks like visibility isn't. Let's run through it, Eric. So I'm intrigued that visibility is as low as it is. And my instant reaction is I wonder if that has been a problem over the last few years, and maybe we're on the other side of folks getting that visibility. But what do you think?
I mean, you said it earlier that, we used to have a hard time knowing, what we need to, what's out there, but now we have too much of it, right? So I almost wonder if we ask this question as too much
Yeah.
visibility, it in a different response.
Yeah, I remember there was uh, a CISO I was speaking to before telling me like essentially we're creating problems for the future, but in a good way. We don't know where anything is, so we need to find everything, and that's going to create the problem. Now, what do we do with everything? And it just seems that that's where things are. Next poll, we're gonna have to try the inverse of these. What about the other two? So this is a pretty even spread. And to be fair, all of the above was noted a few times, so it's not like getting buy-in from stakeholders got a complete zero. It was just tagged in with other elements. But making sense of vulnerability is about 30%, ownership complexity about 25%, all of the above about 40%. Yeah, I'm unsurprised to see all of the above. It definitely feels like these are related, and the conversations I have, it's never seems to be just one thing.
I'm just glad we all care about productivity here. That's
Yeah.
like you said,
Yeah.
right audience.
Good point. All right. Well, appreciate you all for participating. Thanks for getting your participation muscles warmed up. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing, Eric. Why don't you take over the screen share? Then, so everyone, while Eric's getting set up, he'll, like we talked through on the agenda, he'll walk you through some of the cool latest statistics, why now, and then kind of dive into some of the vulnerability risk management category stuff. Eric, why don't you take over?
Okay. Let's see what is going on here. Oh, I started sharing too early here. And you see, it says I'm sharing.
Yeah, I see the title slide.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Yeah, so Alex, thanks for having me. We're gonna dive pretty deep into proactive security, compare that to, what it means to, be reactive and talk about, what programs, are starting to shape out and look like now, and how we kind of see them shaping up in the future, especially as, VRM kind of evolves. And mentioned we haven't done a vulnerability risk management wave evaluation in some time, and it's really the perfect time because we're really at a crossroads in how teams are doing vuln management. There's too much stuff. We have all sorts of ways to gain these insights. So really making sense of this enormous volume of data that teams have is really a core component of how we're building proactive security programs. But why do we want to be proactive to begin with, right? Like what is driving proactivity? Well, I like to look at some of our breach data. So Forrester conducts a survey every single year to security leaders. We ask them all sorts of questions, but one of the questions that gains some of the most attention is questions around breaches. So what we do is we ask leaders, well, were you breached? They say yes. We ask, was this an external attack that led to a breach? If they say yes, we ask, well, what led to it? What was the cause? Software vulnerability exploit, software supply chain breach. These are the leading causes of external of breaches that are result of external attacks time and time again. You see a lot of the other kind of wide array of things that help chain breaches and help an attacker lead to their expected outcome at the end of the day, whether it be leveraging credentials and phishing. But vulnerability exploits and all these other things are part of how we're building proactive security programs and how we want to think about whether we're being proactive or not, or if there's ways for us to improve proactivity. So if you see something on this list, and you feel that maybe you're doing better at vulnerability risk management, maybe your focus isn't on vuln exploit, maybe it's training, enhancing training around phishing, enhancing training around social engineering, because there's always going to be some way that we can improve our proactive program. Another data point that we like to track is, okay, well, you were breached. What was your response here? What did you actually do about it? It's always pretty interesting that the top responses are always around, well, we went out and we bought more stuff. We bought something around that's going to help us, give us more protection or proactivity solutions. Maybe something that's going to help us detect where we were blind beforehand, whether it be around events or something specific that our SOC needs to be aware of. What's really interesting this year is by increased spending on detection technologies is where we typically see as a leading response. So, if you've been breached, we see time and time again that the top response is, well, we went out and we bought more stuff on detection. This is the first year that it's dropped. So now we're seeing that organizations are spending more on response and more on this kind of proactive element around improving their program after they've been breached. And really, what's interesting here as well is that when organizations are breached, their gut response is to go out and buy more stuff. I think it's important we also focus around things like training, upskilling and shifting, your staffing levels around as ways to strategize breach prevention to begin with. But why do we get here? So why are we trying to be, this is probably why we're trying to be proactive, but what does that actually mean? So I'm going out and I'm buying, proactive things. I'm going out and buying, detective, reactive type things. And I think a good analogy, Alex, you said you like analogies earlier. My favorite security analogy is the house. We've all used this time and time again. Probably when you're communicating to business partners, maybe explaining, how some fundamentals of security work are. And we can extend this back to our house, right? Whatever structure it is that you live in. If you're a homeowner, that we're not always proactive about some of the things that go wrong in our house. We're not proactively inspecting our water heater to see if maybe it's going to blow at any minute, right? We typically react. We all of a sudden you go out in the basement and there's a whole pool of water down there, and you're now reactive to how you're maintaining and keeping your home safe and livable at the end of the day. So I like to think as being proactive as inspecting the house, being maybe you're that homeowner that likes to do it yourself, or maybe you're out and you're hiring contractors to, hey, can you go and actually just inspect my roof? Can you scan it for where there might be weaknesses, and maybe I need to have you come in and patch it some way, so that I don't get this leak, so that when the next time it's big threat of a storm comes, I don't need to worry about water leaking in, puddling on the floor, then maybe leaking back into the basement to where we keep our real crown jewels, like our Christmas decorations and stuff like that. But we don't typically do that as homeowners, right? But in security, this is why we want to have things like vulnerability risk management. We want to have things like attack surface management to detect these flaws, so you can get ahead of it. You can deploy that patch. You can make whatever change that you want to make before water's drips through, and damages your home and the real crown jewels there. Oftentimes, within a house, we don't know that there's going to be a leak that occurs, and all of a sudden you're just hanging out watching TV or whatever, and maybe a leak starts coming through your ceiling. You got to go and react to it, like the SOC analysts do, with catching water in a bucket or a pot or a pan or what have you. I like to mention threat hunters as well, because threat hunters are proactive, and they're utilizing both skill sets around the situational awareness that a SOC analyst has, as well as the structural awareness that a vulnerability risk management would be applying to prioritizing and understanding risk and environment as they're detecting all these things. So it's not just, hey, I found this thing. Let's make sure we clean up this puddle here, but also, what caused it? Where's this leak coming from? And that's really where, threat hunters play in proactive security programs. But what do we actually need to do to be proactive? Well, we talked about it earlier. First and foremost, what you need to have is you need to know what you're dealing with. You need the proper amount of visibility in your program to prioritize and know what types of weaknesses might be there, what is attractive to attackers, where the crown jewels are. And this is a prerequisite before we even get to any of the other things, what it means to be proactive. I like to think of going to your annual physical. So, your annual physical that you go and you see your primary care physician, that's a proactive visit. You're identifying and gaining visibility to what's happening with your health and your body and so on, so that you can proactively get ahead and mitigate any health concerns you might have down the road. To do that, they're going to inspect your body, they're going to draw blood, they're going to do all these things so that once they have a complete picture of what's happening within your health and your body, they can properly prioritize a prescription plan, a treatment plan for you and your health. They need that complete visibility, right? Because maybe you have allergies, maybe you have other ailments that need to be considered as a treatment plan and a way to be healthy. Starts to build up a plan, for your health in general. What's the doctor going to say, right? The doctor's going to say, well, you're going to have to go out, you're going to need to exercise more, you're going to need to start eating healthier. And this is the hard part, getting off the couch, actually remediating and preventing, these threat events around your health in the future from occurring. And this is what teams within vulnerability management have a hard time with time and time again. And this is a theme that I see come up with our clients, regardless of maturity level. So I talk to all sorts of clients about vulnerability management. Some of them, are going to be, pretty entry level, trying to figure out, where do I even begin to gain visibility and have prioritization. But even these super mature ones that say, no, we have a strong prioritization method. These are the things that we think about when we think about calculating what to fix first. But we also don't know the status of ownerships. We don't know the status of remediations. Tracking the workflows around response to these efforts is a problem for everybody, regardless of maturity. From the very, the teams that are just starting off on their vulnerability management journey, to the ones that have been doing it for a while and have good visibility and good prioritization. So fixing what you have is a hard part, both from that analogy around, what your doctor's going to tell you need to go out and do, from a health perspective, but also in a practical real life scenario for vulnerability teams. Actually going out and fixing these things is a pretty difficult struggle. But if visibility is a requirement, where do we begin? So how do we start gaining this visibility, especially since we see that attack surfaces are so broad? Back to the breach question that we ask our Forrester clients, we asked them, well, what was actually targeted? What were attackers, probably not looking for in this case, but what were they taking advantage of as part of their external attack? And you really see here, it's interesting that IoT actually leads the answer time and time again. I think this is the third year in a row that IoT is the leading attack asset that was targeted. But there's really a whole breadth of asset types that teams are worried about, or that teams are seeing being attacked, that are actually being led to breaches. Remember, these are the question starts with asking were you breached, and then it leads on to, well, what was actually targeted here. So this goes back to kind of how we were talking about earlier. We have too much visibility. We have all these things, and how do we begin to make sense of how to prioritize all these assets, but then also how to prioritize weaknesses within them. But what even makes up an asset? How should we be defining and thinking about assets? Well, Forrester actually wrote research on this. Of course, we have. And the way that some colleagues of mine talked about categorizing and thinking about assets really broke it down to the classic way that we talked about assets in accounting class, and the way that we build our balance sheets. So some of the characteristics that you should think about when you're thinking about building your proactive security program are first, that visibility aspect, right? But to gain the visibility, you want to make sure you're including all these asset types. And the ways you want to think about including different types of assets is whether or not you've created or procured that asset. That asset should be available during a specific time period and have an expected lifespan that it's providing value to your organization. So you wouldn't just have an asset out there for no reason. I hope not. And there should be some degree of risk tolerance that's understood around that asset. Because if the risk is exceeding that asset's value as far as what it's providing to your business, whether it be quantifiable, like something like revenue, or even something that's more qualitative, like service and augmenting your contact center activities and so on. You want to ensure that this asset is not exceeding what the risk tolerance is. And this includes everything from our buildings. So back to the classic way we learned about assets in accounting class, but also down to the IT assets. So that includes hardware, software, any entity within your IT environment that's important enough to track based on that security or financial threshold that it crosses. You also want to think about configuration items as a way that as an asset class to consider within your vulnerability management or your proactive security management program. So these are things like IT assets when in active service that are considered configuration items. So they might not, if they aren't simultaneously IT assets, they might be logical or conceptual entities like applications, like services, like products that you deploy for your customers to utilize. And last but not least, we classify another asset class around managed objects. This is pretty broad, a base level capability that comes with a lot of these previous asset classes we talked about, that directly configure, provision, or monitor different resources. So some of the managed object asset classes that you might want to think about are log files, very granular entities that provide value, but you don't want to exceed a certain risk threshold, given their lifespan. So this is why. So we have all these different types of asset classes. We have business units running amok, deploying a lot of these things, signing SaaS contracts and so on. And this definition of asset, it keeps expanding, giving security teams a hard time, playing catch up and tracking all this, which is why we went out and we bought all these things to help gain this visibility, right? We used to rely primarily on network vulnerability scanning. 10 years ago, when we logged in, when we wanted to know something about an asset and what existed within our environment, we would log into our VulnScan solutions to understand that. But all these other solutions from CMDBs have really evolved. Agent-based solutions providing a risk picture and vulnerability and weakness types that are available in a wide array of agent solutions like EDRs have emerged to provide that visibility. Agentless scanning solutions, so solutions that ingest logs and data from your cloud environment to help infer, well, these are weak configurations, and these are things that you might want to think about, or at least have visibility on when it comes to assets and weaknesses within your environment. So all these things are helping to build, visibility. So so we know what we should be dealing with, right? Um, and now, and just because we know these are our assets and these are the things that we should have and worry about within our environment, we end up having analysis paralysis, right? We end up having, too many things that we need to prioritize, which is why we have things like this, right? So this is where we have uh, um, vulnerability risk management. We have red teams and pen tester helping us to build this prioritization picture. Breach and attack simulation as a way to help build out a picture of detective control environment, leading to kind of the compensated control world for whether residual risks of an asset should be prioritized. We're augmenting threat intelligence, all the SPM solutions. So we have, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 SPMs at this point, between CSPMs, for cloud, SaaS SPMs, security, SaaS security posture management, SPMs for identity. But how can we really prioritize all these things within our organization when you go to SPMs here, you go to your security validation technology here, you probably have a pen test report, or a red team report that's been flagged in your inbox forever, that you still need to get to. And that's going to tell you all sorts of things that also need to be prioritized for weaknesses within your environment. So we certainly recognize that making sense of all these prioritization methods, it's a struggle. This is where we've also seen vulnerability risk management really evolve and change, since the last time we did our VRM wave in 2019. And we also wrote research again. So we're Forrester, we write a lot of research, and we wrote research on how to make sense of this prioritization. What are the key capabilities that you should be thinking about when you're building your prioritization strategy? Really, at its core, there's really three things that you can classify for how to think about remediation prioritization. Those come down to, well, how important is this asset? Is there actually a threat that's likely to impact this asset? And then to gain that residual risk picture, what are the compensating controls that are going to reduce either the impact of this asset being compromised, or leveraged for another attack, or the likelihood of an attack being carried out. And we break this down even further, starting with threat likelihood, because there's a few core components that we really believe you should focus on when it comes to understanding the actual likelihood of a threat being carried out. Threat intelligence is increasingly added to a lot of these programs to understand, an active exploit. I even put CISA KEV, so CISA's known exploited vulnerability database, which you can sign up for email alerts for and understand active exploits that are occurring out there in the wild, as a way to know, well, hey, if it's happening, if it's being actively exploited in the wild and it's in your environment, and there's things like it being externally facing, which factors into the difficulty of actually exploiting this known exploited vulnerability. That means that there's an increased likelihood that this could be a target for you. You also want to understand the context around threat likelihood. This is where breaking down CVSS can really be helpful. And just quick comment on CVSS. CVSS is still a valuable input to how we see vulnerability prioritization being done. But to really derive its full value, it takes understanding the context of the risk factors that CVSS is talking about when it comes to understanding the actual likelihood and the technical severity of a vulnerability exploit. CVSS v4 launched, I think, was a couple of weeks ago now, and certainly provides ample opportunity for us to better pull and understand context around CVEs and vulnerabilities. After understanding that the likelihood, so what's the actual likelihood of something being exploited, we want to know, asset importance. So, does this asset support a strategic objective that is core to your business and the day-to-day your business achieving a stated business and strategic outcome? Does this asset maintain, store, transmit data that's super sensitive and that should have increased protection around it? But also connection. So how do these assets relate to one each other? How do they connect to one another? As part of an attack chain, but also how do they connect to one another downstream for what's core and foundational for your business? So, even though this is an asset that doesn't have any active exploits or may seem unassuming, doesn't mean that there's not something that it communicates with or it talks to that is much more important and is more crown jewel for your organization. Last, we want to factor in compensated control to help understand that residual risk picture. So you take the threat likelihood, you take how important these assets are. Well, what are the preventative controls, within your network that are helping protect this asset? What kind of detective and responsive controls do you have, whether it be, an EDR agent on there that'll help give you some assurance that, well, even if this exploit is carried out, we have some assurance that our SOC is going to be notified that the exploit is being done. And you can also test these compensating controls with some solutions out there to help kind of build this picture as well, leveraging things like continuous security validation technologies or breach and attack simulation to help know how strong are these compensating controls and how effectively are they operating. So once we have this idea of what we have, we can start to kind of build this picture of what we should focus on when it comes to prioritization. But just like that doctor's visit, because that doctor says, well, you're gonna have to exercise, you're gonna have to eat better, then we got to do something about it, right, guys? We know this is the hardest part, which is also why we have so many things that help us fix these things, right? Patch management's obviously, the core to vulnerability risk management, but so is, SOARs, security orchestration and response, and orchestrating a lot of these workflows, integrations into DevOps tools, and ITSM, IT service management as well, because, I know and you all know that, just because you know something's out there, the people that actually need to fix the thing will need a ticket in there if they're ever going to do anything about it. And really what these are supporting are response options when it comes to vulnerability orchestration. And when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, classic risk management, accepting, mitigating, transferring, or avoiding, right? So these are some really crucial things that I recommend people look at when they're looking at vulnerability risk management solutions. So how do these solutions support accepting risk? How do they support managing exceptions to vulnerabilities? So maybe it's a false positive, maybe it's something that isn't as critical as the formula you put in, deemed it to be, or maybe there needs to be an exception on there because it's just not possible to deploy that fix right now at this point in time. Mitigation really being, patch, deploying the patch. Maybe you can implement some network controls to help that. You can't really transfer vulnerability risk to your cyber insurance at this point, right? But you can transfer it, to other bodies in the organization, especially as you're communicating a lot of this stuff up to your leaders. And this is core now, and this is a theme that a lot of CISOs and security leaders I speak with are worried about, right? Because now we've had examples in the news around security leaders actually taking heat for a lot of this stuff. So how to report this? It's really, when I think about transferring this risk, it's communicating it. It's telling those that need to know and having that track record that you communicated it available as well. And this is where, all this kind of starts to come together, right? We talked about visibility, prioritization, remediation, how these are the core inputs to how we're thinking about a proactive security program. Visibility being that prerequisite to really being able to effectively and correctly prioritize all these things. The remediation, obviously, once you know what you should be fixing, but we have all these inputs, right? We have all these things that help tell us this is what's visible, this is what you should know about. Here's how you should prioritize these things, and then fixing these things. And this is how we see the market evolving, and how the market is really has already responded to a lot of these challenges. So to gain visibility, there are solutions out there. Chasm, Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management, that's really looking to give visibility around assets, around how assets relate to one another, control environments within these assets. And they're doing this by ingesting all these solutions you have in your stack to best understand that complete asset holistic picture there. Exposure management we view as chasm, but a way to help understand a weakness and not just CVE weaknesses, so CVEs that are been identified by vuln scanners and prioritized throughout your different methods, but also weaknesses that are detected in your security posture management systems, things that are being contextualizing with things like threat intelligence and pulling together. Well, if there was an attack, and this is how an attacker would view your environment, this is how you should prioritize choke points within your asset environment to help get the best bang for your buck for your remediation efforts. VRM, vulnerability risk management, is foundational to how we're doing a lot of remediation as well. They have the strongest integrations with ITSMs, the strongest integrations with patch management systems, especially as they give you insights around patch blast radius and efficacy. So deploy this patch because then you will remediate the most amount of vulnerabilities within the available options here. And this is generally how we see kind of the VRM market playing out, but you're going to see overlapping capabilities and functionalities from vulnerability risk management, exposure management, and attack surface management vendors as well. There will be sometimes you'll see it through different SKUs, different packages, but you'll also see vulnerability risk management solutions provide some of these capabilities that exposure management's looking at when it comes to prioritization, attack path modeling, and so on. And then you need to report on this all, and this is crucial. And this I want to make sure I drive this home, that when you're communicating to your leaders, when you're communicating to your board, this is how you want to think about how and what you're communicating. So tell them this is how much visibility I have. This is what I know about. Here is what I don't know about, or what I suspect I don't know about. And here's how often we're gaining new kinds and new types of assets daily, weekly, monthly, that we will need to make sure we keep tabs on. Same with prioritization. Here's how we're prioritizing this stuff. Solicit feedback. Is there something around a strategic objective that I might need to be better aware of, so I can make sure I'm prioritizing vulnerability risk in our environment the best way possible. And also, obviously, remediation. I do see mean time to remediate, mean time to resolve as a common way to track a lot of this stuff. Do that. Find other ways to track remediation, but make sure you're communicating this stuff. You want to make sure you're communicating this stuff through reporting on. This is where we see remediations that usually have long amounts of backlog, that are delayed, that are risk accepted, that have exceptions on them. And make sure you're communicating that up to your leader. As we see, the things like recent news events on CISOs and community security leaders being held more and more accountable. you got to make sure you're reporting this stuff up. So if you know that if anything ever hits the fan, you have a record of this is how I reported and how I managed it, down to visibility, prioritization, remediation. So just quickly, I'll go over how we thought about the VRM wave inclusion criteria. We do look at enterprise class. So are these solutions supporting your typical enterprise, which we define as a organization with 1,000 employees or more. You want something that we looked at things that had solutions that had a breadth of offerings. So they're supporting multiple asset types and so on. And then VRM vendors that our Forrester clients want to know about and hear about. And I think this is last. Yeah. So the last thing is how do we evaluate these? So I talked a lot about prioritization. I talked a lot about response and remediation orchestration. And a lot of these current offering evaluation criteria that we've looked at for our vulnerability risk management wave were around that. So things like threat intelligence, exploitability, business context, compensating controls. These are all things that factor into how these solutions prioritize. But then also things like operations tool integrations, automation for remediation, SOC and SOC integrations, and how these solutions augment or assist with emergency and celebrity vulnerabilities as they come up. All support ways to think about responding to vulnerability and remediations and so on. So I hope you all found this really helpful and I wasn't rambling just too much. I actually see some questions in the chat that came through as well. And I've just been talking, so I haven't been able to look.
All right. Yeah, Erik, I tagged you in those. Well, so for everyone, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A in Zoom. We'll get to those in a second. Before we do that, I'm gonna jump back into sharing just literally two more slides with you guys. Kind of riff off of what we were talking about earlier on the Brinka side, and then kind of pulling together some of what Erik was talking about on the Forrester side. So same slide as earlier, but I'm not gonna repeat the same stuff that I said. It's just you saw from Erik how complex this is. So again, when you think like why is Brinka articulating the concept of risk operations center? It's just to have a construct to funnel all of this into, right? You need to know about it, need to prioritize it, need to actually do something about it. And there's different ways to get started. On the Brinka side, for those of you that are unfamiliar with what we do, so we're a SaaS platform that pulls in your disparate security findings into one place so that you can prioritize, remediate, and report on risk from that data set. And we're going to see it as a super aligned to taking this more proactive approach. I appreciate your analogies, Erik. I'm going to steal the one about the house. And there's different ways to solve the problem, but it's hard to make sense of everything without kind of putting it all in one place first and then sorting through the mess. This is kind of the Brinka philosophy, if you will. So with that, just want to call that out. We do have a few more questions and we have time for them. So I'm going to wrap up here. I'll leave this screen up while we go through the Q&A. For those of you, thanks for joining us. For those of you who want to learn more about Brinka on the technology side, I found it's always a good way, at least I know some of you filled out the pre-event survey. You're just looking to learn more. I was found one good way to learn more is just, what are the software vendors in this space doing? Because they're essentially codifying some of these practices that, like Erik is talking about. And if you go to brinka.com, check out the website, want to reach out to us, learn more on the technology side of it, definitely do that. With that said, Erik, do you want to kick it off with that first question on the list? Can you see those?
Yeah, I do. So Andy asks, do you consider data to be an asset? Which is an excellent question, and we could deep dive into this, probably spend a whole other webinar, whether of how much or how little data is an asset. And I say how much or how little because yes, it's at least a little bit of an asset, but it's probably a big asset. Let me, and I'll apologize in advance to do this, but let me talk about zero trust just really quick. I promise it'll be quick. The way Forrester views, zero trust and building zero trust models, data is at the core of it. Without work, you have data at the core, but you also have workloads, identities, all these other and really important concepts that we talk about when we're talking about zero trust. Data is at the core because workloads need that data, identities need to access that data. Your devices are working and maintaining that data to some extent or another. So my opinion then is that asset maybe our data may be your most important asset, and then everything else within your proactive security program is protecting it, right? That's the core of information security as we all learned about it, over the years, and certainly should be part of how you think about proactive security, in my opinion.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add, Eric, so this doesn't necessarily answer the question, but I think it answers the response to the spirit of the question. One of the interesting use cases I've seen, so it's not just the vulnerabilities and the assets. It's like you were saying, like you actually have to go do something about it. And the reality operationally, we'll have to find the owner that can do something about it. And so one of the situations I've seen recently was, okay, the typical definition of an asset on the Brinca technology side is, what is is it a server? Is it, some code? Is it a code project? Like what is it? But then when you go assign ownership, where it's getting interesting, it's, well, it might be the same server or same piece of code, but depending on what the problem is, the owner is actually different. There's a data owner. This is where the data part comes in. There's like the code owner. There's the infrastructure owner. So it's being able to slice and dice and kind of tag the information to be able to act on it at the end of the day. So I just wanted to call that out because, data security is, pretty topical as well. And it seems like some teams out there, just so Andy, just so you know, are tagging it that way. So maybe not a asset in the traditional sense, but important enough that it impacts ownership and needs to be documented so that you could, address the issue. All right. All right, we got an anonymous attendee asking. I love this question. We're gonna have to do another webinar for it though, I think, but I don't know, Eric, you have a quick response. Can we dive a bit deeper into reporting?
Yeah, I'd love to. And reporting is something that, I have a lot of clients ask me about as well. I guess if I'm going to take it further than what I brought it in the webinar, I recommend that you have a consistent reporting method, and that you have a way that you're sourcing and thinking about reporting, so that there's a consistent delivery method, right? So if you think about things back to, how I had it laid out in that slide, prioritizing things, remediating these things, you want to think about, how am I going to source this all, whether it's in, a warehouse or a data lake, or I'm using, some other sort of data management tool to help consolidate and be able to really start to do creative, cool things with this data, right? Because once you have, once you have things broken out into, how you're prioritizing or how much visibility you have, you can start to put this in a data lake or cut it a certain way so that you can compare, well, I have this much visibility on this asset type and I'm prioritizing it this certain kind of way. And then do I have a different kind of outcome for how I'm tracking my remediation efforts? So high level, to dive deep into reporting, get this question all the time. Have a consistent way that you're managing it all. And one more thing real quick, understand too that there's different types of reporting. So there's some reporting that you need to support tactical objectives that you need like real-time visibility on to be reactive, to respond to threats, to respond to risk, right? And for solutions like that, you want to make sure you're not like warehousing that and making it like old data that you're then responding to. When it comes to reporting, you want to make sure you're reporting on things that support strategic and operational objectives, that tell you about what's happened, prior. I hope that makes sense. That's a deep dive we could, spend another webinar on.
Yeah, quick deep dive for sure. So subscribe to kind of Brinca LinkedIn if that's interesting to you. We're gonna hit that topic early next year. It goes deep. Just put it that way. But yeah, echo whatever Eric said. Why don't we do this? So there's a couple questions from one person. There's another anonymous question. Why don't we hit the anonymous question first, and then Nestor will tackle both of yours, and then we'll wrap up in the interest of time. So another anonymous question: how do you maneuver delegating tasks to complete this mission?
Yeah, so I said it earlier that this is one of one of the main pain points that I talk with clients about. So even if they are just starting out their vulnerability risk management program, down to we've been doing this for 10, 15 years. We have really, really complex, prioritization formulas that we use that we built in house or whatever. Delegating all this stuff is still where a lot of folks have a hard time with. So this is where I see vulnerability risk management solutions really responding to this problem. I think you're going to see vulnerability management solutions really drive a lot of how these workflows and these orchestrations play out when it comes to delegating tasks based on certain risk thresholds as this market evolves. Um, Throughout the VRM wave, I did notice that the way a lot of VRM solutions work now is they're almost like a SOAR, but for like proactive risks, right? So you can build all these like crazy complex workflows when certain conditions are met, and when certain asset classes are there, or certain ownership, maybe an ownership's defined there, and then you can build out delegation through that. um I guess I'll add to that. When it comes to delegating tasks, check out, if you haven't looked at it yet, CISA's security specific vulnerability categorization. I think I got that right. It's just it's CVSS backwards. Um, and they talk a lot about, well, you should delegate tasks through decision trees and certain logical conditions, if and when a risk threshold is met, it's a certain type of ownership, it's a certain asset class, and so on. And this is really where you start to see vulnerability risk management solutions provide a lot of that customization, specifically into ITSM. So ITSMs are the core way that I see most vulnerability teams work when it comes to delegating these tasks. And there's a lot of ways to build a workflow within a VRM solution, and so that it pops right into Jira or ServiceNow or what have you, for that workflow that is appropriate for that team.
Yeah, and I'm gonna the reason we kind of went out of order. So Nesh, for your first question, any suggestions to lower management overhead costs in terms of manpower mostly? So I want to kind of riff off that. So a lot of on the Brinka side, like expect what we see problems coming into kind of prior to Brinka. Hey, it's being done, but it's being done manually, and it's just the scale's too big now. I say this like I feel almost on a weekly basis. It's not a human scale problem anymore. So, what's one way to do is if if you continue to do the same thing, or you just want to codify the logic, just let the robots do that kind of manual task work. Humans can focus on the rules. So like at the simplest, one example we show on the Brinka side is just, hey, it's a critical exploitable vulnerability and a patch is available. Just, that's a use case. You can create a rule and an automation around it. The detail is here just on the Brinka side of the world. If you did that for every single sort of detection tool you have where you could do a little bit of that ruling, then you're running through the same problem at a higher level versus doing the effort of pulling things in together to one unified view, where now we have one place to create one rule that we can span across multiple detection tools that could then also funnel out to your multiple different ITSM tools. And for context, Brink is on the large enterprise side, so typically being an IT issue would go to ServiceNow, a development issue might go to Jira or ADO or something like that. So you need some kind of muscle on the platform side from our experience to be able to build this stuff. It's non-trivial. So that's interesting. Like reach out to us with that. So we got time for one more question right here. Nestor, it's your last one. So when talking about accepting risk, how do you take into account the knock-on effects, multiplicative effects from other existing risks?
That's a great question. And this is where I would probably lean on or defer on a solution called cyber risk quantification. So these are some solutions that you see emerging in the market. that have a lot of overlap with vulnerability risk management, attack surface management, and exposure management as well. Um, and and really what they're driving at is, we talk about vulnerability risk, we talk about a vulnerability being risky, right? But at the end of the day, it's not the vulnerability that's risky. There's a risk to a certain business process. So there's a risk to, back to data, this sensitive data being exfiltrated or tampered with or so on. So, to kind of answer that really high level, think about it from, well, what's actually risky to your business? What are you worried about? And then how do all these downstream effects, help drive that risk assessment, which is something that, you see in CRQ, cyber risk quantification.
All right. All right, Erik, thanks for joining us today. Audience, thank you for participating in the poll and also in the Q&A. Doesn't just help you get your questions answered, helps everyone else know what questions are out there and where they stand. With that said, that's all the time we have for today. Again, check out brinka.com if you haven't already. We'll follow up. We'll have a recording available. Yeah, have a good rest of your days, everyone. Erik, do you have any last words you want to share with anyone?
This stuff's hard. That's why, I laid out the presentation the way I did, is that, it's hard. Just if you try and simplify it and think about it, well, what do I have that's visible? How am I prioritizing this stuff, and how am I fixing it? It's still hard, but it makes it a little bit more simple.
All right. Well, thank you again, Erik. Thanks everyone. Take care.
All right. Thanks, guys.